Hi guys, hi, hello. So happy Thursday. What we got going on today is we're going to talk about the Vietnam conflict coming to a close. Yesterday we focused on again, the early years of Nixon and his time as president in his decisions regarding Vietnam, his Vietnamization policy, and of course, his very controversial decision to invade Cambodia before all things were said and done. So, we're going to talk about how after that, how long it takes us to officially bow out of this situation that has been mixed up in stalemate for many years. After that, we're going to talk about the legacy of Vietnam, kind of the immediate and then the longer term stuff. At the end, I've got work to be completed. And here we go. Okay, so America's longest war ends. Again, the fact of the matter is that again, this war was the longest conflict that America was actively participating in the history of our country up to that point. And in March of 72, so thinking again, it was 78 or not 78, 68 when Nixon was elected, and his again Vietnamization policy went into effect in 79. So it's been about 3 years since Nixon took control of this conflict. In March of 72, North Vietnam is going to launch its largest attack on the South since the Tet Offensive. When they attack the South, our guys who are still there fighting in this war, are going to be ordered by the president or commander in chief to again retaliate. There's a massive bombing campaign, and they plant a bunch of harbors in the or plants a bunch of mines in the harbor. I apologize, off the coast of North Vietnam. In the end, it's a lot of death and destruction, but no win, no territory won or lost. It's all, again, just a stalemate. Keeps going back and forth. By 72, Nixon recognizing that the people of our country are just they're tired. They're tired of this process. The divide that has keeping them apart between Dubs and Hawks. It's got Nixon worried about the new election, which is happening in 72. So he has to change tactics about how he talks about Vietnam and the way he presents his policy. He does tell the whole country that peace is at hand, that again we're getting out of Vietnam regardless of the North, again regardless of what's happening, that is the end. There's an end in sight, and that does a lot to kind of calm people as they go into 72 and vote for him. He will be reelected in November of 72. Of course, Nixon, as he has time and again told us one thing and done something different. He is going to authorize one more big, I guess, offensive movement in December of 72. There's like this final push. The negotiations, which had never really been successful in any way, shape, or form because both sides were unwilling to bend or compromise. They break off again because another plan gets rejected. So he is going to gift the North Vietnamese with the 11 nonstop days of bombing minus Christmas. The Christmas bombing is really our last major offensive movement against the North Vietnamese. And we as a nation are just tired. We're tired. This is a conflict that was supposed to go quick and be done. And we were supposed to be swift and victorious like we were in Korea, and how we managed to come out on top in World War II. And well, Vietnam is just nothing like any of the conflicts that we've been in up until this point. Of course, officially ending a conflict that has lasted Again, at that point, it's approximately 7 long years. It does take some time, so it isn't until March 29th of 1973 that an official agreement is met. This agreement is in regards to the war itself between the North and South. All right, as well as restoring peace in Vietnam. So, trying to end the civil conflict and allow for the United States to pick up and get out. So what this agreement includes is, and at this point, we're just whatever the deal is, we got to get out of here. So the North Vietnamese are still going to have troops in the South. They do promise to respond. We promise, I apologize, as we're leaving or like walking out the door, having given up this fight, we do promise that if anything should change, that if the North should become aggressive towards the South, or if anything should happen like that, that we'll come back. And again, it allowed for us to leave. The war ends not with a bang, but with a fizzle, at least for ourselves. And we are going to get the last of our U.S. combat troops home after that point. Things in Vietnam at first are fine, but then things start to really ramp up because the North, again, they want to be one Vietnam. That is the goal here. So after we get all of our troops up and out, the North is going to launch a full-scale invasion of the South. With their troops already in place, it's pretty swift, this new renewed fighting between here. The South does reach out to us. Again, it's part of that agreement that we signed in 73. This is taking place in early 75. And we, again, it would have been a political suicide to send us back there. So instead of sending troops, we just offer them money and other kinds of support like that. By April of 1975, the South will surrender to the North. And to this day, they still have a form of communist government in control of them. It's changed a lot, and there is no perfect communist nations that exist out there to this day. But Vietnam's close as far as that kind of stuff goes. Whew. Talking about Vietnam, I mean, we've only talked about it for, I don't know, what, 5 days? Feels like 5 years because it is such a complex and long, drawn out fight. So now we got to talk legacy, consequences, impacts, however you want to discuss this. The first thing, of course, to kind of discuss is the brass tacks, thinking casualties, casualty counts. So we, the United States, in the Vietnam conflict, remember that we never officially declare war on them. We're just there helping the South. We're going to lose 58,000 men in this conflict, and another 303,000 are going to be wounded. Again, coming home, things like that. Again, those numbers are quite large, obviously, and again, a tragedy in and of themselves. But when you compare them to the amount of Vietnamese that lose their lives, it's kind of it's like almost a funny comparison, because between the North and the South, they lost around 2 million people, of course, across the course of this conflict. And of course, having all of that death and that, excuse me, all of those casualties in a war that we didn't even win, it just makes it that much tougher to swallow overall. Okay. Another aspect of the legacy of the Vietnam conflict has to do with our soldiers coming home. Of course, and soldiers came home at various points throughout this conflict, but it is important to understand that by the time this war comes to a close, our relationship to veterans has changed a little bit, especially in regards to this conflict, because so many people disagreed with it, and so many people blamed it for a lot of the bad things that are going on in our lives in the United States. And because of human nature, they want to blame someone, and oftentimes the people who are easiest to blame are those with the least amount of blame to be had. And that is going to fall onto the shoulders of a lot of veterans coming home. The welcome home is so different. to wars previous. Again, the friends and families of vets obviously are ecstatic and they're so happy to have their, again, loved ones back again. But the nation as a whole is not as welcoming. Again, we didn't win this fight. We don't want to think about it. Once it's done, it feels like we need to just put distance between ourselves. So, unlike, again, World War II or even Korea, there's no parades in the street and there's no big parties planned. And these people are welcomed back after suffering through this horrific experience and they're faced with a lot of indifference. People are like, who cares? Who cares that you fought in that war? That war was dumb. That war was not, it was pointless. Again, in some cases, people are openly hostile towards veterans. There's so many heartbreaking stories of veterans who get off the planes and they're met with these protesters. And like I said, they're just looking for someone to blame and they'll like spit in the faces of these vets and they'll call them terrible names and call them murderers and they'll say all of these really derogatory things towards them. And that, of course, is not okay. Not everyone experienced that, but way more vets experience this welcome home than they should have. Right? Another thing that makes this war different as far as legacy and impact goes is not only were a lot, again, veterans coming back and coming into a country that didn't necessarily care for what they did, this war was hell in a new formation. Again, we talked about this at the beginning, that this fight was something that took a toll on the psyche of American soldiers in a way that some of our other conflicts might not have, at least not in the numbers that there were. Again, most figured it out. And of course, dealing with a lot of the psychological impacts or ramifications of a conflict, most of it is just buttoned up, put away, not talked about it. But not everyone manages to escape the lingering effects of fighting in a place like Vietnam. So the amount of diagnosed PTSD goes way up after this conflict. And there is a certain apathy amongst vets, this not caring, this listlessness that makes it hard for them to care because they saw so much tragedy and so much killing and death and destruction. A lot of them bring home the coping mechanisms that they had across those thousands of miles: alcohol abuse, drug abuse. There is a higher number of vets who commit suicide after Vietnam than any of the wars previous to this. It's a really unfortunate but true fact of the matter. And this war, again, it leaves emotional scars on us as a nation as we tried to go through it, and of course of those who are there fighting. Other kind of long-lasting impacts or consequences of this Vietnam conflict, other parts of Southeast Asia are going to suffer after this war comes to a close. Once the American presence has left Southeast Asia, communism has kind of free reign to be able to do what they want. After South Vietnam falls to the north, they're going to set up labor camps to re-educate people who didn't commit to communism during the fight. A lot of people from Vietnam are forced to flee. There's a huge spike in the amount of, again, basically Southeastern, but mostly Vietnamese refugees coming to the United States in the mid to late 1970s. They're, again, usually referred to as the Hmong population. So if that sounds familiar to you, again, that's something in Minnesota. There's a huge sort of concentration of them, refugees that ended up there. Cambodia also, right next door, plunged into a brutal civil war with Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot, which you'll remember from last year in World Studies if you took it. Other consequences, impacts, we've still got a lot of division. Again, the Hawks, they're sort of clinging to this idea that we could have won, and it was the protesters' fault because they kept distracting the country, because not believing in the government, so on and so forth. The Dubs, they believe that escalation would have just continued. This would have just dragged out or turned into a bigger conflict as other countries stepped in. The draft will be abolished. We're now no longer no longer in our country is there a draft like it had been before. Again, we are going to operate our militaries on volunteers alone. Again, not having Selective Service Act any longer. Then there is this idea, the War Powers Act. So in 1973, after we pull our troops out of Vietnam, Congress is going to step up and be like, well, okay, so this was a big issue. What happened here was not good. And we gave LBJ kind of blanket approval to do what he wants, but now we have to roll that back a little bit. And they're going to restrict the power of the president in regards to war with this act. So the War Powers Act of 73 states that a president must inform Congress within 48 hours of sending forces into hostile area without declaring war officially, and they have to ask for permission to declare war anyways, so it's about approval and being able to check the president. Also, if they don't get, again, a declaration of war after that 48 hours, they can only stay there 90 days, unless, of course, Congress approves it to last a little longer, war is declared officially, so on and so forth. So this is a restricting of presidential power that exists in this modern day as well. After this conflict, we become much more hesitant, much more cautious, thoughtful. Where are we going to get involved? How are we going to get involved? Is military action necessary? And you'll see that it's going to be quite a long time until we put ourselves into a position to actively fight. It's not until the Persian Gulf War in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, that that's going to occur, where we're actually going to send people out to fight. Though there'll be plenty of fighting that happens. Oh, yep, yeah, that's right. Overall, that we do get involved with, but not in the same way. The last impact, and probably, and the one that you can still see today, is there is much more cynicism and suspicion amongst the American people. We are very, very much in the, I guess, at this point, tradition of questioning people, questioning our government, questioning our leaders. Are they telling us the truth? What is this? Again, what can we believe? What can't we believe? And going forward, all of our public figures are going to be under a new kind of microscope, magnifying glass, that every decision is going to get asked and talked about and criticized and picked through, where pre-Vietnam, we were much more willing as a country to accept it at face value. And this is something that still exists to this day. That's what I got. Okay. So work to be completed. Just keep on checking classroom and all that good stuff. You've got an item due today, which has to do with the anti-war movement, which, again, was active throughout the entirety of it. I'm trying to answer the big question of why did Americans oppose the war? It's not just, oh, we don't like fighting. There's more to it than that. By Monday, you guys will be checking, I'll be checking that you guys have started working on your local history part 2. And if you have questions about that, let me know as soon as possible. It's due the week after that, Monday with the 11th. You'll turn it into turnitin.com. Please look at the how-to. It's got step-by-step the whole way through to the end. And then again, there'll be examples up there, students' examples up there that you can check out if you're looking for what does the final product look like. And if you're looking for more information on Vietnam and you want to kind of check out some differing sources, again, I've got some enrichment stuff there. It's not required. It's just extra. If you have questions, let me know.